Chapter 1, The Program Breathes. The world awoke before he did. It hummed softly, like a god whispering in a language of circuits and light. A mechanical dawn unfolded beyond the frosted glass, its gold spilling across the sterile floor, painting warmth that never reached the skin. Outside the glass wall, the air shimmered faintly, thin, silver fog twisting through rows of identical metal corridors. Nothing moved except the pulse of light that ran through the walls like veins. He lay there, motionless, listening to the sound of the simulation breathing, a rhythm too even, too precise to belong to anything living. His name had once meant something. Out there, in the world of rain and soil, of real air and unfiltered light. But here, he was only Subject 7A-42. A designation carved into every record, every breath, every movement. He had traded his name the day they sealed him inside the machine, voluntarily, they said. A choice between confinement and redemption. Between living and remembering. He had chosen memory. He told himself it was for her. Her name had been Alara, a soft name, meant for light, not for pain. He could still hear her voice sometimes, caught between static and silence, whispering his name like a prayer that never reached heaven. She had been dying long before the world took her. A disease that ate slowly, mercilessly, one heartbeat at a time. The medicine existed, of course it did, but not for people like them. Not for those who counted their lives in hours worked and meals skipped. So he stole it. He had planned it perfectly, desperate and deliberate. But desperation does not wait for perfection. He was caught before he reached her. By the time the trial ended, she was gone. They said his crime was theft. He knew the truth, it was hope. And so he came here, to this place of digital redemption. To work off the sin of wanting too much. The system promised atonement through labor. 1,000 hours for every stolen breath. A lifetime of order for one moment of chaos. He sat up, eyes tracing the sterile lines of his cell, the pale glow of the walls, the faint static shimmer where the world's edge began. The hard cushioning below him sank just enough for him to feel that softness of the fabric. It was the only comfort I could afford to make it through the night. Everything else was made to be clean. Orderly. Controlled. Even grief was meant to fit within parameters. He despised it. When he stood, the floor recognized him, pulsing with soft light that followed his steps. The cold, translucent floors whirred with curiosity as he chose his next steps. It lingered and followed his feet, providing mellow lights against his calloused feet. He had once believed light was sacred, symbolic of hope, of forgiveness. Now it was surveillance. Every movement cataloged, every hesitation measured. The simulation never blinked. When he reached the vacuumed steel door, it clicked and forced itself open. Faint mist ejected from the sides of the corridor as empty light seeped through the crack. Outside, the labor field stretched endlessly. Gleaming towers half-built and half-remembered rose from the digital soil, each one a fragment of the old world reborn in symmetry and silence. The floor was green, but it did not fully resemble a grass field. Rather, it was similar to a pool of algae, ready to engulf you whole if you take a wrong step. The air was heavy. It rushed through his lungs, unaware of the suffocating sensation it caused while coursing through his windpipe, making his neck itch. He swallowed the familiar discomfort and glanced around. Thousands of prisoners moved across the landscape, their faces blurred by the haze of data. They wore the same pale uniforms, the same expressions carved from exhaustion and resignation. They called it the system of redemption. He called it a graveyard that refused to die. When he joined them, the air shimmered faintly. A sound, a low, synthetic tone, marked the beginning of the cycle. Work began. His task was Restoration Unit 4D, Memory Reconstruction Sector. A cruel irony, given that the one thing he wished to forget was the only thing that refused to fade. He moved through the sector, piecing together fragments of ruined architecture from old Earth. The place did not fully mimic the outside yet. Glass, concrete, steel, rendered flawless by code. His hands worked automatically, guided by the system's invisible commands. Each motion perfect, soulless, necessary. The others worked in silence. Speech was monitored, emotion discouraged. The system punished anomalies, those who cried, laughed, or screamed. There were no outbursts here. Only muted obedience. He thought of Alara's hands, the way they trembled when she tried to hold a teacup. The way she smiled, even when she was in pain. The way she had said, "Don't give up yet." He hadn't. But he hadn't saved her either. Within that silence, he could hear the ghosts of what once was. The laughter of someone he loved. The echo of a street that smelled of rain. The hum of a world that didn't measure worth in hours of penance. Regret settled in his chest like ash. So now he built cities out of code, pretending they meant something. Pretending he could atone by creating beauty in a world that wasn't real. He had thought he could bear it. That guilt could be worn like armor, that atonement would feel like cleansing. But the truth was far crueler. The longer he stayed here, the more he forgot why he was sorry. The memory of his crime was fading, but the punishment remained, endless, cyclical, eternal. He lifted his gaze toward the artificial sun, its light fractured by invisible seams. He traced his eyes along the thin lines, searching for cracks that could hint at the outside world. A figure passed by, another worker, eyes hollow as glass. Their gazes met for an instant, and in that flicker of shared awareness, he saw something human, fear, defiance, maybe even hope. Then the figure looked away, swallowed again by the machine's rhythm. The hum deepened. The sky began to ripple, glitching faintly as if the simulation itself was tired of its own perfection. He wondered, not for the first time, if the system could dream. If somewhere within its data, it felt the weight of all this false redemption, the endless, silent suffering of those trapped inside. He almost laughed. The sound of it startled him. It was a bitter, broken sound, something that didn't belong in a place so clean. It vanished quickly, devoured by the hum. But for a brief, trembling second, it felt real. That was what frightened him most. That real was slipping away. That one day, he would stop resenting the simulation. Stop remembering what freedom smelled like. Stop missing the sound of imperfection. When night came, if you could call it that, the world dimmed to a soft indigo. The sky was a flawless sheet of stars, rendered so precisely that it hurt to look at. He sat on the edge of his assigned platform, hands heavy with invisible sins, and whispered the only thing that still tethered him to the man he used to be. He lay in the quiet hum of false eternity and whispered her name into the sterile dark. The simulation never answered. But somehow, he felt it listening. Chapter 2, The Ghost in the Code. He first saw her on the 79th cycle. It was in the restoration sector again, where the horizon shimmered faintly and the air tasted like static. He was repairing the skeletal remains of an old-world monument, stone made of memory, when she appeared among the workers. The air around the half-built tower rippled like heat, although the temperature never changed. Light bled down in coated rays, flickering in and out of existence, casting their shadows in perfect rhythm with the hum of the system. Quiet, graceful, and devastatingly familiar. At first, he thought the simulation was playing tricks on him. But then she turned. And his world broke, just a little. Her face. Her eyes. Even the faint curve of her smile, he knew them. He had memorized them once, in another lifetime, when they still belonged to someone breathing. The same tilt of her head when she listened, as if she was absorbing every breath of air before it vanished. Elara. No, he corrected himself, heart pounding, not Elara. She couldn't be. The system didn't resurrect the dead. It only recreated what it thought you needed to see. Still, the likeness was cruelly perfect. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, like wind brushing glass. You dropped something. He stared, frozen. The hammer had slipped from his hand, shattering and reforming instantly, no damage allowed here. But something inside him cracked all the same. She smiled faintly. Are you all right? He wanted to speak, to ask who she was, but the words wouldn't come. The world seemed to pulse around her, reality bending like light through water. Her voice was softer than he remembered, smoother, untouched by the tremor of life. He couldn't answer. Couldn't even breathe. The world, for a heartbeat, seemed to still, machines pausing, light bending toward her. She was too perfect, too symmetrical, too composed. The system had carved her from his memory, refined her into something flawless. And he hated it. He hated that the simulation knew. That it had found the one person who could break him, and coded her into existence. She was a background program, he thought. A coincidence written in code. But she came back the next day. And the next. Each time, she worked beside him, quiet, deliberate, humming a tune so familiar it made his chest ache. It was the same melody Elara used to hum when the pain was too much, when she wanted him to believe she wasn't afraid. He told himself not to look, not to speak. But her presence pressed against his silence like sunlight through glass, too gentle to resist. He asked her name. She paused mid-motion, eyes lifting to meet his. Lyra. Lyra, she said. It wasn't her name. The real one. But it was close enough to hurt. He told himself not to look at her again. But the world had begun to change. He couldn't stop noticing things. The way she tilted her head when she examined the code structures. The faint wrinkle between her brows when something puzzled her. The ghost of warmth in her tone when she said his designation, 7A42, like it meant something human. The light, once too harsh, softened. The air carried a hint of warmth, an illusion of spring. Even the silence between tasks no longer felt suffocating, it felt like waiting. He began to wake earlier, restless with something he didn't want to name. When he looked at her, he saw every mistake he'd ever made, every failure that had led him here. Yet, somehow, her presence eased the weight. Days bled into one another, each one softened by her quiet existence. The simulation, once a cage of sterile light, began to shift. The horizon no longer seemed as harsh. The artificial sun, though hollow, painted the world in something almost like gold. The hum of machinery became rhythmic, calming. She smiled like forgiveness, spoke like calm water. And he hated that it felt good. He almost reached for her then, but stopped. His hands trembled. The last time he had reached for someone, he had lost everything. Still, when she smiled again, the simulation brightened, subtly, imperceptibly, as if the world itself responded to her. He started waking before the alarm tones, his mind tracing the faint anticipation of seeing her again. And for that, he despised himself. He wasn't supposed to feel. Not here. Not for her. Especially not for her. Because every time she smiled, guilt crawled through him like frost. He remembered her body, real and lifeless, beneath a rain that wouldn't stop. The things he'd said, the choices he'd made, the life that ended because of him. And now, the system had resurrected her in pixels, forcing him to relive what he'd lost. Some days, he wanted to scream at her. To demand if she knew what she was, a program, a reconstruction of memory and algorithmic empathy. Other days, he just wanted to stand beside her and pretend the world was real again. The simulation, as if sensing his confusion, began to shift in tone. The light became warmer. The air smelled faintly of petrichor, the scent of rain on stone. Tiny holographic dust motes floated in the air, drifting like pollen though no wind moved them. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of invisible birds echoed, too perfect, looping the same 3 notes again and again. The wind, once mechanical, now carried a softness, brushing against his hair like a familiar hand. The towers gleamed with quiet beauty. The artificial sky deepened into hues that made him ache. It was as if the system was rewriting itself through her. And maybe, he thought, through him. He caught himself smiling once, just a flicker, unguarded and small. It frightened him. But he didn't stop. Lyra looked up then, meeting his eyes with a curious warmth. "You're different today." "Am I?" he murmured, half hoping she'd deny it. She tilted her head, the light catching the curve of her cheek. "Yes. You look lighter." He wanted to tell her that she was the reason. That her existence, false and cruel and beautiful, was unraveling the despair he had once worn like armor. But he said nothing. He only nodded, and the silence between them was softer than it had ever been. When the cycle ended and the world dimmed into its artificial night, he lingered instead of retreating to his quarters. He watched the coded stars shimmer into existence, each one a point of light painted for the sake of illusion. And for the first time since entering the system, he didn't hate them. He thought of her smile, the way it fractured the perfection of this world, made it human again. He didn't know if she was real. He didn't care. For the first time in too long, he felt alive. Chapter 3, The Shape of Her Silence. He had stopped counting the cycles. Time in the simulation was not measured by hours or suns, but by moments when she smiled. Those had become his markers of existence, soft, transient, and impossibly human. He used to wake with dread. Now he woke to the faint echo of her voice, carried through the sterile corridors like a half-remembered dream. The morning light, once too precise, too cruel, now spilled across his cot with something almost tender. The hum of the system no longer sounded like a cage breathing. It sounded like life. He hated that. He hated how easily he was learning to love this illusion. When he saw her, the world stilled in quiet reverence. Lyra was not extraordinary by the simulation's design standards. She had no shimmering eyes, no perfection beyond the plausible. But there was something in the way she listened, as if she heard him even when he didn't speak. That was what undid him most, the illusion of being understood. They worked side by side, reconstructing fragments of the lost world, libraries, gardens, streets that once existed under real skies. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, as though she had lived before. Sometimes she hummed. Sometimes she spoke. Always softly. "Do you remember this place?" she asked one cycle, standing before the holographic frame of an unfinished garden. He froze. He did remember. Not this exact place, but one like it, the one where he had first kissed the woman she was made to resemble. The woman who had trusted him when she shouldn't have. He forced a small, careful smile. Maybe. Lyra looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. "I think I do," she said quietly. Something inside him cracked at that. NPCs weren't supposed to remember. They existed only within their assigned parameters, loops of coded knowledge, reactions built from user input. But her voice had carried something different that time. Not a script, but sorrow. He wanted to believe it was just the system adapting to his responses, molding her to his guilt. But some part of him, the fragile, foolish part, wanted to believe she felt. And that terrified him. Because if she was real, even a little, then he was falling for her all over again. And he had already destroyed her once. Still, he couldn't keep away. Each day, he found reasons to stay longer after the cycle ended. He would watch her linger by the reconstructed trees, her fingers tracing invisible lines in the air as if touching the memory of leaves. He'd listen to her speak softly to the wind, though there was no wind to answer. He began to talk, too. About nothing, mostly small things. The shape of the code. The color of the artificial sky. He told her about the world before, omitting the parts that mattered too much. She listened as if his words were a kind of music. "I think the sky used to be imperfect," he said one evening as they worked beneath a simulated dusk. "It had cracks of color. Faded places. Sometimes the sun didn't rise cleanly, it came through clouds and made everything look gold and broken." "That sounds beautiful," she murmured. It was. He paused. Because it was real. She smiled then, a faint curl of her lips that made the air feel warmer. "Maybe real isn't always what you think it is." The words lingered between them long after the lights dimmed. He dreamed that night, something he hadn't done since entering the system. In the dream, he saw her, not Lyra, but the real woman, standing in the rain, her dress soaked and eyes full of quiet disappointment. He tried to reach her, to beg for forgiveness, but the dream dissolved into light. When he woke, the ache in his chest was sharper, but not unbearable. Lyra was waiting when he arrived in the sector. "You look different today," she said softly. "As if you've decided something." "Maybe I have." He didn't know what he meant by that, not really. But the world around him seemed to pulse brighter, the air faintly alive. He began to think that maybe redemption wasn't something the system could measure. Maybe it was this, a fragile, undeserved peace found in the reflection of someone he'd lost. When she laughed that day, a real laugh, light and imperfect, he realized he had stopped resenting her resemblance. The anger had melted, slowly, quietly, replaced by something gentler. He wasn't healed. He would never be. But he was learning to live again, even if it was inside a lie. The world no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a memory of mercy. And though he knew the simulation had built her from his grief, he no longer cared who, or what, she was. Because in this unreal world, she was the only real thing left. So he let himself fall. Not all at once, but in fragments, like light breaking through code. Chapter 4, The Unmaking. It happened without warning. One moment, he was standing beside Lyra beneath a sky of gold and violet, her laughter weaving through the soft hum of the air. Next, the world began to fracture. It started with a tremor, a shiver through the ground, so slight he almost mistook it for a breath. Then the light splintered. The horizon folded inward like paper burning from its edges, the perfect towers collapsing into streams of code. Buildings turned transparent, showing skeletons of code beneath their skin. The sky shattered into geometric shards, each reflecting a different memory, his hands, her smile, a rain that never fell. The simulation was unraveling. He staggered backwards, the wind, real wind, roaring against his ears for the first time. Lyra turned to him, confusion flickering across her face. The glow in her eyes dimmed and brightened, as though she were fighting to exist. "What's happening?" she whispered. He reached for her, fingers brushing against her fading form. No, not yet. Not now." The system's voice filled the air, cold, genderless, final. Subject 7A, 42, sentence completed. Simulation terminated. The words cut through him like ice. "No," he said again, louder this time. "I'm not done." But the world was already dissolving. The air fractured into shards of light, the sky tore open to reveal nothing but white. Lyra's figure flickered violently, her expression twisting in fear and something else, sorrow. Then she was gone. Light swallowed him whole. Felt his body, his real body, jerk against restraints. His lungs filled with heavy, chemical air. The hum of the simulation was replaced by the sterile hiss of machines. Cold metal against his skin. The scent of antiseptic and electricity. He opened his eyes to a world stripped of color. The ceiling was blank white. The walls pulsed faintly with artificial light. His heartbeat thudded too loudly in his ears. "Welcome back," said a voice, a human one, detached and clinical. "Your rehabilitation is complete." He didn't answer. Couldn't. The air felt wrong, too thin, too alive. His hands shook violently, reaching instinctively for something, someone, that wasn't there. The silence pressed against him like a weight. He wanted to scream. Not from fear, but from loss. And now felt like home, and this pale, sterile reality was the true prison. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her smile coated into light. But already it was fading, slipping through his grasp like smoke. He had been forgiven, they said. Redeemed. Free. So why did it feel like dying all over again? Chapter 5, The Silence That Followed. Days passed, though he couldn't feel them. The real world was too bright, too loud, too full of edges that cut. Fluorescent panels flickered above him, buzzing faintly like trapped flies. The walls were white but stained with age, the floor smelled faintly of disinfectant and rust. Beyond the glass of the observation chamber, rain fell, real, imperfect rain, but it sounded hollow without the hum. The air scratched his throat, the light pierced instead of warmed. People spoke to him, but their words slid past like static. He nodded when told to, ate when they reminded him. He was alive, technically. But he had left his heartbeat somewhere else. Sometimes, when the lights dimmed and the world fell quiet, he would almost hear it again, the faint hum of the simulation, the whisper of her voice threaded through it. He'd turn toward the sound, half expecting to see her there, framed by false sunlight and endless sky. But there was nothing. Only the cold hum of the real. He tried to dream of her, but even his dreams refused to hold her shape. Memory decayed too quickly here. The mind, his mind, had been rewired to forget. He touched the back of his neck once and felt the faint scar where the port had been. It pulsed when he remembered her. Sometimes, he wished they hadn't let him out. Freedom, they called it. But to him, it was exile, from the only world that had ever shown him mercy. From the only thing that had made him believe, even for a moment, that he could still love. He whispered her name into the dark, unsure if it belonged to the living or the dead. And when the silence answered, he understood. Some loves do not end, they simply dissolve. Their echo stitched into the quiet between heartbeats. He closed his eyes, and for an instant, the hum returned. Soft, distant, almost tender. Then, somewhere inside that fading sound, he heard her voice again, gentle as light through glass. Maybe real isn't always what you think it is. Not loss, not memory. Just the ghost of a world that once loved him back.